there was a run-up of several days in which it included quite a lively discussion about the merits and the actual whether or not it was a good idea to hit the Houthis, which also included the remarkable intervention of J.D. Vance, the vice president, saying he wasn't in favor of it because it would be good for the Europeans, because it was the Europeans who mostly benefited from the trade going through the going through the Red Sea. Look, this is. This on so many levels, Kate, this is just such an astonishing screw up.
The editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, who was accidentally added to a group chat in which US national security officials and J.D. Vance, the most high level of those, planned a strike against the Houthi rebel group. The White House has confirmed that this has happened. Editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Gerry said he was added to the Signal message group, which also included accounts labelled as the White House national security advisor Mike Waltz, as well as we've said, J.D. Vance. The material in the chain included information about targets, weapons, the US targets and weapons that the US would be deploying, and attack sequencing against the Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. Here's Donald Trump giving his reaction to the story in the last hour or so.
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
With the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis?
Right.
Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it.
There you go. Donald Trump denying all knowledge there. Gerry, let's go to you first of all. I mean, this is a huge security breach, isn't it?
It's just, I mean, one kind of runs out of superlatives really here. This is an extraordinary security breach. I mean, the fact, I mean, you laid it out there very well, Kate, and also what we hear from the article now written by the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, who's written this account of what happened, was not only did it include details of the war planning, the targets being used, the US assets being used. This was hours before the strike on the Houthis last week, but it went on for longer than this. There was a run-up of several days in which it included quite a lively discussion about the merits and the actual whether or not it was a good idea to hit the Houthis, which also included the remarkable intervention of J.D. Vance, the vice president, saying he wasn't in favor of it because it would be good for the Europeans, because it was the Europeans who mostly benefited from the trade going through the going through the Red Sea. Look, this is. This on so many levels, Kate, this is just such an astonishing screw up. I mean, firstly, what on earth were they doing conducting these extremely confidential, top secret conversations on an app? On their phones, presumably. Signal is an app now. It's a secure app, but it's not as secure as the usual communication systems the senior US government officials use. Usually, these conversations are not supposed to happen outside what are called SCIFs, which are secure, comparted information facilities, where if you're a senior official, national security official, you have to be inside a building. They often have them built inside their homes to protect against the risk of hacking and all of this kind of stuff. So they were conducting this conversation. This like a bunch of sort of schoolgirls talking about or schoolboys for that matter talking about what they were getting up to.
You can use girls if you want. Perhaps that's more appropriate.
They don't want to accuse of being sexist. Schoolboys can be much worse than girls on this, as we know. And they're this unbelievably loose conversation. And by the way, this from a bunch of people who were incredibly critical of the security arrangements that. The Democrats had, whether it was Hillary Clinton and her famous, emails being sent from a private email server and all this kind of stuff. It is just an astonishing level of incompetence, recklessness, lack of concern, lack of security, lack of interest in the security of, this could have put. I mean, as I say, as it happened to this editor, Gerry had this information a couple of hours before. Unfortunately, I mean, he was a responsible journalist. He obviously didn't publish it, and he hasn't published still, even after the event, details any of the really, really sensitive details about weapons and targets and all that kind of stuff. But he had that information hours before this attack took place. Imagine, who else could have been included in that, or if he had accidentally leaked it to somebody else. I mean, it could have, it could put American lives at risk. It could put Allied lives at risk. I mean, this will just, this will alarm allies. It will alarm anybody who's interested in this. And I think and I hope there has to be a major revision going on here with some heads rolling and everything else, because it is a shocking security breach.
Yeah, it's really embarrassing. Let me read you. Wish I'd had time to voice this out, but let me read you a bit of it. And Zoe, I'm going to ask you for your opinion. But this just illustrates some of what Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, was getting through this signal group that he'd been invited to. And there were various operational updates. The discussions about Europe had already happened. And then he says, it was the next morning, Saturday, March the 15th, when this story became truly bizarre. He says he won't reveal the details of exactly what was said, but he said... what I will say, in order to illustrate the shocking recklessness of this signal conversation, is that the Hexith Post contained operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen, including information about targets, weapons the US would be deploying, and attack sequencing. This is when the SHIT gets real, in other words. The only person, says Goldberg, to reply to the update from Hexeth was the person identified as the vice president. I will say a prayer for victory, Vance wrote. 2 other users subsequently added a prayer emoji too. According to the lengthy Hexeth text, the first detonations in Yemen would be felt 2 hours hence, at 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time. So I waited in my car in the supermarket parking lot. If the signal chat was real, I reasoned, Houthi targets would soon be bombed. At about 1:55, I checked X and searched Yemen. Explosions were being heard across Sana'a, the capital city. I went back to the signal channel. At 1:48, Mike Waltz, in inverted commas, had provided the group an update. Again, I won't quote from this text, except to note that he described the operation as an amazing job. A few minutes later, John Ratcliffe, in inverted comments, wrote a good start. Then you've got Mike Waltz with a sort of a kind of punching emoji, an American flag, and then a fire. MAR says, and that could be Marco Rubio, could be, good job, Pete and your team. Mike Waltz says the team in MAL did a great job as well. SM says, great work all, powerful start. I mean, as you say, it is kind of schoolboy / almost sort of tech bro-y stuff. It's sort of government bro. I don't know whether we can call them administration bros. Whatever we're calling them, there are women in there as well, I think. It is extraordinary that planned strikes on Houthi rebels, on people and on areas and on infrastructure are being discussed in this way. Zoe?
Yeah, of course, all that stuff and everything you've both said is, of course, 100% what I think. But I mean, I'm also just not that surprised. I mean, this is the most unprofessional administration that anyone could have even envisaged. I mean, let's not forget in 2016 when he came in, people were just in a state of complete shock about about how this could even happen, how this person could head up, the government of the United States. So, people seem to have just completely accepted this kind of Trump court of Trump this time round. I mean, the world doesn't seem to be that shocked anymore, but it is still shocking. And so it is just no surprise at all that they're kind of like, rude, colloquial, kind of, as you say, bro-ish way, just leaks into a kind of carelessness that sort of thinks, yeah, whatever, like the rest of the world, or so, everything's nothing serious apart from our kind of particular, grab for power and what we say. No one else counts. No one else exists. I mean, what I would say is that what I found kind of, chilling, as well as the security breach of reading this, was just the kind of the nastiness of J.D. Vance's politics and the way that they minimize really important things on the world stage in this incredibly binary...
As if it's a game almost, right?
Well, just like, why should we intervene in the Suez? Only 2% of our ships go through, whereas 37% of Europe's, or, sorry, you have to check those figures, but it's roughly around there. Therefore, like, we should make sure we get our own, if we do this and we protect the Suez Canal, we need to make sure we get payback for that, or else the American public's not going to understand. I mean, this is an incredibly reductive and crude way of thinking about foreign policy, which we've seen in the approach to Ukraine, obviously. And also this idea, the Americans don't want you to do anything that might have a benefit for the entire world, even if it's shipping through the Suez Canal, which is just stupid to think that if European trade is completely disrupted, that won't have some kind of knock-on effect. The only other thing I'd say is that it's just too intimate a view of what they're like. And I was, however, the one interesting thing I noticed was that their grammar wasn't bad. I was expecting on top of this to sort of see kind of just like really like bottom of the barrel text style, but they they
Well,
had
basic.
apostrophes in their itses and stuff like that. So that was one thing I clung
They may be playing fast and loose with the security of the Western world, but at least they know how to spell it. But actually, they didn't. There was at least one error in there that I saw. But can I just say one other very quick thing, Kate, which I think is really important too, and I think will become subject of more discussion, which is you played very well that clip from the president when he was asked about this afternoon. He clearly, and that I don't think that was dissembling. Obviously one always hesitates to say anything about Donald Trump knowing what's going on in his head, but that didn't sound to me like he was dissembling, because he didn't seem to know about the story at all. So in other words, this breach happened. They knew that all of the top national security team knew it had happened, because Jeffrey Goldberg obviously went to them within the last few days, to get comment and blah, 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 and to understand, and they came back to him, all this kind of stuff. So this very, very high level breach happened, and nobody briefed the president about it. And
what he said, he actually says in the piece earlier today, and I think this is, I've just got the printout here, March 24th, yes. He says, earlier today, I emailed Waltz and sent him a message on his Signal account. I also wrote to Pete Hegseth. I outlined some of my questions. So to be as accurate as we can be, emails went out earlier today, US time, however you might define that. The story went up at 12 midday Eastern time. So they would have had a few hours on it at least.
Governments work if they, when something of this scale of a security breach happens, you figure out what's gone on first of all, and then as soon as you possibly can, because it's going to come up, especially when it involves a journalist, it's going to become public. So you go to the president and you say, "We've had the most almighty
prepare for this,
Mr. President. You better be prepared for it." No, told him, and I think that is going to be, that might start to reveal some interesting things about the extent to which Donald Trump is actually involved in all these things. You remember,
yes.
Over the weekend, he was also talking about, these the deportations of these Venezuelans, these supposed, gang members to El Salvador. And he was asked about that over the weekend, or the beginning of the weekend. And he said, "Oh, I wasn't really involved in that. Marco Rubio knows all about that." Now, that could have, of course, been dissembling. And of course, it could have been, not my fault, wasn't anything to do with me. But I also suspect we might start to learn more and more that there are decisions being taken that actually the president actually doesn't.
So I was going to ask you, Gerry and Zoe, most importantly, and I'll ask you to be brief on this. What we saw during President Trump's first administration was a falling apart of the people around him who weren't informed enough, who weren't loyal enough, eventually, who President Trump became very dissatisfied with pretty quickly. And there were various fires and then hires. There have got to be questions asked about whether Waltz, who is the national security advisor, whether he's sort of violated various bits of the Espionage Act in revealing what he revealed over this group and having invited a journalist to it as well. So those questions need to be asked. Is there any danger this time round that Donald Trump sees what's happened here and is embarrassed by it, and it does start to cause, we've not seen any of this so far, but it starts to cause little chinks in the armour of this administration? Will it have any effect? Zoe, just briefly first, and then Gerry, on to you.
Yes, I can imagine it will. And you're right. It is strange that this one seems to be this administration seems fairly ironclad, whereas the last one was just heads rolling left and right.
Well, it's kind of purposefully ironclad, isn't it? You are not allowed to detract or
No, it's a kind of loyalist
from Trump. Yeah,
it's a sort of dictatorship style. So of course it has to be ironclad, but inevitably that doesn't mean. Obviously, we know from history and we know from so of course it isn't. And this is as good as any reason for those chinks to start getting really, really big. And perhaps they already are, but it's going to become visible soon. I think you're probably right about that.
Any danger here, Gerry?
This is a much tighter knit team than the team Trump had in his first. We've all said that and seen that, and it's true. These are handpicked people, loyalists to Trump, who are, whose allegiance to him is not in any question. Very unlike that first team. So that's why we saw leaks, a lack of cohesion, disagreements, all constantly bursting out into the public. What is, again, that's what makes this so interesting, Kate, is that first of all there are signs of disagreements there within this group, and JD Vance going out there saying, first of all, saying that we don't really want to do anything to help the Europeans here. Why are we doing this? This seems like a mistake. Though there are clearly policy. Now, there are always policy discussions in any administration. That's not new. But it was quite interesting that the way he presented it as, does the president really know about it? Does the president know this is really going to benefit the Europeans and is not really going to be of much use to the US? That suggests, again, some divisions within there. But secondly, it's just this, if somebody here, there is a massive, massive level of incompetence here on somebody's part. We don't know exactly who, and even if it's a staffer in somebody's office, obviously somebody's got to take responsibility for it. And that level of incompetence is going to lead to divisions of its own sort. I mean, there are going to be people, I would imagine right now that if you're JD Vance, you're absolutely furious about this, or if you're Marco Rubio, you're furious about it, or whoever's responsible for this. So that, even though these people are all fiercely loyal to Donald Trump and in a servile way, they're clearly, they're going to be fighting like the proverbial rats in a sack over stuff like this. And so we could probably then expect to see things, erupt into the open perhaps a little more than we were thinking.
And Donald Trump's response, kind of, who cares, because those attacks were highly successful and effective. And that line was parroted by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt a little later on. It doesn't matter because it was a successful operation. Let's see.